Carrier Strike Group cost $15 billion and carries 5,000 sailors. But before deployment, they must survive 6 months of training so brutal that some quit. Here's what really happens. It's 04 whole hours. A Carrier Strike Group sits in port. 5,000 sailors, 10 warships, 70 aircraft, $15 billion in hardware. In 6 months, they'll be in a combat zone, potentially facing enemy missiles, submarines, asymmetric threats. But today, they're not ready. Not even close. What happens between this moment and deployment day is a transformation most people never see. A brutal, methodical process that turns a collection of ships into a lethal fighting force. Sleep deprivation, leave fire exercises, simulated combat so realistic that sailors can't tell the difference. 90% of naval warfare happens before the first shot is fired. This is the story of how America's Navy prepares for war, and why getting it wrong means sailors don't come home. Before we talk about deployment preparation, we need to understand what we're preparing. A Carrier Strike Group, or CSG, is not just one ship. It's a floating city, an airfield, a missile battery, a hospital, a diplomatic tool, and a weapon of war. At its heart, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, Nimitz or Ford class, over 1,000 feet long, crew of 5,000, supporting it, guided missile cruisers, destroyers, attack submarines, supply ships. Together they project American power across 500,000 square miles of ocean. But here's what most people don't realize. These ships don't just leave port and head to a combat zone. Between deployments, crews rotate. Equipment degrades. Systems need recertification. Every single deployment requires a complete rebuild of combat readiness. The Navy calls it the Optimized Fleet Response Plan, OFRP. It's a 36-month cycle broken into 4 phases. Maintenance, fixing everything that broke during the last deployment. Training, rebuilding skills from the individual to the strike group level. Sustainment, maintaining readiness while on call for emergencies. Deployment, the actual combat mission. Today, we're focusing on Phase 2, training. 6 months of preparation that separate life from death. Month 1. The training phase begins. But it doesn't start at the ship level. It starts with individuals. Every sailor, from the newest seaman to the most senior chief, must recertify their combat skills. Damage control, firefighting, chemical, biological, and radiological defense. Why? Because on a warship, everyone is a firefighter. Everyone is damage control. When a missile penetrates the hull, there's no calling 911. The crew saves the ship, or the ship sinks. So they train. Repeatedly. Obsessively. At the Navy's Damage Control Training Center, sailors enter a mock-up of a ship compartment. The instructors light actual fires, flood the space with water, simulate hull breaches. The heat is real. The smoke is real. The panic is real. Sailors have minutes to extinguish the fire, shore up the breach, and evacuate casualties. Those who fail, they repeat it. Again and again, until muscle memory takes over. Then comes weapons training. Gunners' mates run live fire exercises. Operations specialists practice tracking multiple air contacts simultaneously. Sonar technicians hunt simulated submarines and underwater acoustic ranges. This phase is brutal because it's personal. Every sailor must prove they can do their job under stress. Sleep deprived. Scared. Exhausted. Because in combat, that's exactly what they'll be. Month 2. Individual skills are certified. Now comes the harder part. Making the ship work as a single organism. The Navy calls this phase basic phase, though there's nothing basic about it. A carrier has 4,500 crew members. That's 4,500 moving parts that must function in perfect synchronization. The ship begins running general quarters drills, simulated combat scenarios that test every system simultaneously. Here's what a typical drill looks like. 200 hours. Most of the crew is asleep. Suddenly, klaxon alarm. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill. Within minutes, every sailor must be at their combat station. helmeted, suited up, ready. The bridge takes tactical control. The Combat Information Center tracks threats. Medical prepares for mass casualties. The scenario escalates. Simulated incoming missile. The ship's close-in weapon system must engage. Fire on the mess decks. Flooding in machinery spaces. Man overboard. Aircraft crash on deck. Everything that can go wrong goes wrong. And the crew must respond to all of it simultaneously. The first time they run this drill, chaos. Sailors are in the wrong place. Communications break down. Response times are too slow. So they run it again, and again, 20 times, 30 times, until a crew that took 15 minutes to respond can do it in 4. But here's what makes this especially punishing. These drills happen at random, middle of the night, during meals, during supposed downtime. Why? Because enemy missiles don't wait for convenient timing. By the end of basic phase, the crew operates on 4 hours of sleep. They're exhausted, stressed. Some are questioning their life choices, but they're becoming a fighting unit. Month 4. The ship is ready, but a carrier doesn't fight alone. Now comes integrated phase, where the entire strike group learns to fight as one. This is where complexity explodes. You've got a carrier conducting flight operations 24/7, destroyers and cruisers establishing air defense zones, submarines hunting enemy subs hundreds of miles away, supply ships conducting underway replenishment, all while maintaining communications, security, and tactical formation. Coordinating this requires planning that would make NASA jealous. The strike group begins running composite training unit exercises, COMPTUEX. This is the final exam before deployment, and it's designed to break them. The Navy brings in Red Team units, dedicated aggressor forces that simulate enemy tactics. They throw everything at the strike group. Air threats. Fighter aircraft playing the role of enemy jets attempting to penetrate the carrier's defensive bubble. Surface threats. Fast attack craft simulating Iranian-style swarm boats. Subsurface threats. Friendly submarines acting as hostile subs trying to torpedo the carrier. Electronic warfare. Jamming communications. Spoofing radars. Cyber attacks on ship systems. Asymmetric threats. Small boats packed with explosives. Unmanned aerial vehicles. Mines. The strike group must detect, track, and neutralize every threat, while simultaneously conducting offensive operations, launching strike packages, coordinating with allied forces, managing logistics chains that stretch thousands of miles. And here's the kicker. The Red Team's job is to sink the carrier. They use real-world enemy tactics, exploit every weakness, push every system to failure. In one famous COMPTUEX exercise, the Red Team sank a carrier 3 times in 1 week. The strike group had to halt, debrief, identify failures, and run it again. This is intentional. Better to fail in training than in combat. By the end of COMPTUEX, the strike group has fought and survived scenarios more intense than most actual combat deployments. They've learned their weaknesses, fixed their mistakes, and built a trust that holds units together under fire. But there's another side to deployment preparation that doesn't show up in training manuals. The human side. While ships are being certified, sailors are preparing for something else. Separation. A typical deployment lasts 7 to 9 months. That's 240 days away from home. Marriages are tested. Parents miss births. Children grow up. Relationships end. The Navy knows this, and they try to prepare sailors for the psychological toll. Mandatory counseling sessions, financial planning workshops, family readiness briefings. Chaplains hold services addressing fear, loneliness, and faith under pressure. Mental health professionals teach coping strategies for stress, isolation, and trauma. Because the Navy learned the hard way, technical readiness means nothing if sailors mentally break down mid-deployment. During the final weeks before deployment, the pace becomes almost unbearable. Work shifts extend to 18 hours. Crew members haven't seen their families in weeks. The pressure is crushing. Some sailors crack. They go UA unauthorized absence, or request emergency hardship transfers. The Navy tries to accommodate when possible, but the reality is harsh. The mission comes first. In the final days, families are allowed aboard for Tiger cruises, brief trips where loved ones see what their sailor does. It's bittersweet. Spouses see the danger. Kids see where mom or dad will sleep for the next 8 months. Parents wonder if this is the last time they'll see their child. Then comes deployment day. The pier is packed. Families wave flags. Babies are held up for one last look. Couples cling to each other until the final moment. The carrier's whistle sounds. Lines are cast off. Slowly, inevitably, the ship pulls away from the dock. And for the next 7 months, those sailors belong to the Navy. Not to their families. Not to themselves. To the mission. So what happens after all that preparation? Does it work? The answer is, overwhelmingly, yes. When U.S. Navy carrier strike groups deploy, their readiness levels are unmatched globally. In the Persian Gulf, they conduct combat operations with near-perfect execution. In the South China Sea, they project power that keeps adversaries at bay. During humanitarian crises, they deliver disaster relief with surgical precision. The training works because it's realistic, brutal, and unforgiving. Consider the numbers. USS Harry S. Truman Strike Group, 2018 deployment, 8,500 sorties, flown. 17,000 ordnance, loaded, 0 aircraft losses, 0 major equipment failures. 98% mission success rate. USS Ronald Reagan Strike Group, 2022 Indo-Pacific deployment. 200-plus days at sea. Coordinated operations with Japanese, South Korean, and Australian navies. Multiple freedom of navigation operations in contested waters. 0 safety incidents during high-tempo operations. This level of performance doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of those 6 months of preparation. The drills that seemed excessive. The scenarios that seemed unrealistic. The training that seemed cruel. In combat, they become the difference between survival and catastrophe. But there's a cost. Constant training cycles strain crews. Extended deployments damage families. The operational tempo is unsustainable for many. The Navy's retention rates tell the story. After 1 deployment, 70% of sailors re-enlist. After 3 deployments, that drops to 40%. The human cost of readiness is real, and the Navy is constantly balancing operational demands against personnel welfare. Recent reforms have tried to address this. Shorter deployment cycles, more predictable schedules, increased shore duty rotations, better mental health support. But the fundamental reality remains. Preparing for combat requires sacrifice. From the sailors who miss their children's birthdays, to the families who live with constant anxiety, to the taxpayers who fund a $230 billion annual Navy budget. This is what readiness costs. Every single day, right now, there are U.S. Navy carrier strike groups deployed worldwide. In the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, the Western Pacific, the Indian Ocean. 5,000 sailors per group, thousands of miles from home. Maintaining readiness, projecting power, preventing wars through presence alone. And back home, another strike group is going through the cycle, running the drills, fighting the simulated battles, preparing for the real thing. It's a system that never stops, a cycle that never ends. Because in the modern world, American naval power isn't optional. It's the backbone of global trade routes, the guarantor of allied security, the deterrent that prevents great power war. But that power doesn't come from advanced technology alone. It comes from the 19-year-old kid who joined straight out of high school, now standing watch at 0300 in the middle of the ocean. It comes from the officer who's been awake for 36 hours coordinating a complex operation. It comes from the families who endure long separations, worried phone calls, and the constant fear that comes with loving someone in harm's way. The phrase "ready to fight tonight" isn't just a slogan. It's a promise that costs billions of dollars, endless hours of training, and immeasurable personal sacrifice. But it's a promise the U.S. Navy has kept for over 200 years. Because when that call comes, when a crisis erupts, when allies are threatened, when American interests are at stake, there's no time to prepare. You're either ready or you're not. And the Navy? They're always ready, not because it's easy, but because the alternative, being unprepared when it matters most, is unthinkable. So the next time you see a carrier strike group pulling into port or deploying overseas, remember, those sailors aren't just, they've earned their place there. Through months of brutal training, sleepless nights, failed drills, and past certifications, through sacrifice that most of us will never fully understand. That's what combat readiness really looks like. And that's why, when America needs them, they're ready.